Have you ever wondered what really happened in the past? Beyond the pages of textbooks lies a world of fascinating tales, extraordinary figures, and incredible events. Join me as we explore them on Exploring History in Sleep. Welcome to a captivating journey through time, where tales of the ancient Roman Empire are whispered softly, gently lulling you into a deep sleep. Let go of the day's worries and let the cozy crackle of a fireplace transport you to an ancient world, where the light of history intertwines with the shadows of unsolved mysteries. Have you ever wondered what secrets slumbered beneath the grandeur of emperors and the majesty of the Colosseum, buried in the earth for millennia? Tonight, we'll delve into strange stories, insidious conspiracies, and chilling discoveries that history has tried to bury. You'll meet an orphaned boy who stumbled into the opulent world of the palace, only to become entangled in deadly whispers. You'll hear about a statue that wept blood, a mysterious dagger in a grain warehouse, or letters from a long-lost legion promising a terrifying return. Do you dare to listen to the lullabies of forgotten souls from a secret chamber beneath the arena? Or feel the eerie silence of the Senate before a great empire crumbled? This isn't just dry history. These are tales of survival, of power corrupted, of mysteries that transcend the limits of time. Each whisper, each revelation will unveil a piece of the past, leaving you both intrigued and gently drifting into the embrace of slumber. Let the gentle crackle of the fire and these whispered historical stories guide you into a deep sleep, where the mysteries of ancient Rome will appear in your dreams. Story 1: The Boy Who Dined with Emperors. Imagine, if you will, the beating heart of the ancient world. Not the pristine marble temples shimmering under the Mediterranean sun, nor the glorious triumphs parading through the Forum. No, tonight, we delve into the shadows, into the grime and the glory, into the very pulse of Rome, a city built on ambition, spectacle, and secrets. Picture the Colosseum, that colossal amphitheater, a testament to human engineering and human cruelty. Its towering arches, even in ruins now, still whisper tales of roar and blood. But what about the lives lived in its shadow? The unseen, the unheard? Tonight, we introduce you to one such life, a boy whose path was destined to intersect with emperors, where whispered truths were more dangerous than any beast in the arena. Our story begins with Silas, a boy of perhaps 10 or 11 years, though hardship had etched lines of premature age around his young eyes. He was an orphan, a street rat, one of the countless forgotten souls who eked out a meager existence in the labyrinthine alleyways surrounding the great Flavian amphitheater. His days were a ceaseless scramble for survival, scavenging for discarded food, dodging the heavy sandals of passing legionaries, and occasionally slipping into the roaring chaos of the Colosseum itself to gather scraps, or simply to witness the raw spectacle that captivated the masses. He knew the Colosseum intimately, not as a tourist marvel, but as a living, breathing beast that devoured men and beasts, and occasionally offered a grim living to those desperate enough to linger at its edges. Its shadows were his home, its echoes his lullaby. Silas was quick, nimble, and possessed a keen awareness, the kind born of constant vigilance. He had to be. The streets of Rome, even away from the grandeur of the Forum, were unforgiving. Beggars, thieves, desperate men, and even more desperate women clawed for every crumb of existence. Life was cheap, and a boy alone was a target. His clothes were rags, perpetually stained with the dust of the city, and his stomach was a hollow cavern, perpetually aching with hunger. Yet, despite the grim realities, a spark of fierce, unyielding curiosity flickered in his young eyes, and a quiet determination hardened his jaw. He was a survivor, not by choice, but by necessity. His nights were spent huddled in alcoves or beneath the crumbling arches of forgotten aqueducts, listening to the distant roar of the city, a sound that never truly slept. The damp cold seeped into his bones, and sleep was a fitful thing, broken by the gnawing of rats or the phantom screams from the arena that still echoed in his mind. He dreamed not of glory or wealth, for such concepts were utterly alien to his world, but of a full belly, of a place to sleep where the rats wouldn't dare, of a moment of peace untroubled by fear. One fateful evening, as the last vestiges of twilight bled into the ink-black Roman night, a commotion erupted near one of the lesser-used entrances to the Colosseum. The spectacles had just ended, the crowds thinning, their cheers fading into contented murmurs. Silas, ever watchful, was scavenging for discarded fruit peels or a forgotten piece of bread amongst the refuse, when he heard it, the sharp glint of metal, the muffled grunts of struggle, and the hushed, urgent whispers of men. It was not the usual drunken brawl of gladiators or disgruntled citizens. This was different. This was precise. This was dangerous. He quickly recognized the figure caught in the struggle. It was Lucius Valerius, a prominent senator, a man of immense wealth and influence, known for his refined tastes and his penchant for sponsoring lavish games. Lucius was a man whose presence in this grimy corner of the city was unusual, almost alarming. He was surrounded by several shadowy figures, cloaked and armed, their movements swift and silent, clearly not common brigands. This was an assassination attempt, precise and ruthless, unfolding in the dying light of day. Before Silas could fully comprehend the scene, a glint of steel flashed. One of the attackers lunged at Lucius, his dagger aiming for the senator's unprotected back. It was a fatal strike, meant to be quick, silent, untraceable. Instinct, raw and unthinking, surged through Silas. Without a moment's hesitation, the boy, quick as a street rat and used to darting through tight spaces, threw himself forward. He wasn't aiming for the attacker. He was aiming for the senator's cloak, pulling with all his might, a desperate, clumsy tug that momentarily unbalanced Lucius, causing him to stumble. It was just enough. The dagger, instead of finding its mark in the senator's back, grazed his arm, drawing a thin line of blood that barely registered in the chaos. The momentary disruption was all Lucius's personal guards, alerted by the sudden movement, needed. With a shout, they surged forward, their short swords flashing, engaging the assassins in a brief, brutal skirmish. The attackers, realizing their element of surprise was lost, melted into the labyrinthine alleys as swiftly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the cold wind and the metallic tang of blood. Lucius, shaken but miraculously alive, leaned heavily against a stone archway, his arm bleeding freely. His guards, scanning the shadows for any lingering threats, quickly secured the area. It was then that Lucius noticed Silas, a small, trembling figure, still huddled near his feet, a forgotten piece of apple peel clutched in his grimy hand. "Boy!" Lucius barked, his voice sharp with adrenaline. "What in the name of Jupiter are you doing here?" Silas, terrified, stammered, unable to form words. He had acted on instinct, without thought of reward or consequence. He merely pointed, a trembling finger towards the alley where the dagger had flashed. One of the guards, a burly centurion, looked from the boy to the senator's bleeding arm, then back to the alley. A slow realization dawned on his face. He pulled your cloak, Senator. Just as the blade struck. Lucius, still catching his breath, looked at the small, ragged boy with a new intensity. A child, a street urchin, had, by some impossible stroke of fate, saved his life. The sheer unlikeliness of it, the almost divine intervention, struck him with a profound force. He was a man of power, accustomed to orchestrating events, not to being saved by the least of society. He reached into his purse, pulling out a handful of silver coins. "Here, boy, for your quick thinking." But Silas, his eyes still wide with fear, shook his head. He hadn't done it for money. He had acted without thought, a raw impulse to avert violence. He was already backing away, ready to melt into the shadows, to return to his life of anonymity, far from the dangerous world of senators and assassins. Lucius, however, was not accustomed to being refused. He saw something in the boy's eyes, a spark of innocence, a raw instinct for self-preservation untainted by greed. "No," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "You have saved a life, boy. And a life saved demands more than mere coin." He looked at his centurion. "Take him. Clean him. Bring him to my villa. We will see what use he can be." Silas, terrified and bewildered, found himself swept away. The grim reality of his street life vanished in an instant, replaced by the bewildering luxury of Lucius's vast villa. He was bathed, clothed in soft, clean tunics, and given food, real food, more than he had ever seen in his life. He ate until his stomach protested, then until he was full, a sensation so foreign it felt almost dreamlike. But even amidst the newfound comfort, a knot of apprehension tightened in his belly. He was a street rat, utterly out of place in this world of marble and silk. He understood the unspoken rules of the alleys, the constant struggle for survival. But the rules of this new world, the world of nobles and power, were unknown, intricate, and potentially far more dangerous. Lucius, a man of practical mind, soon determined Silas's purpose. He would be trained as a cubicularius, a chamber servant. A silent, observant presence in the inner sanctums of the villa, a watchful shadow privy to secrets and whispers. It was a role that demanded absolute discretion, unwavering loyalty, and the ability to see and hear everything without being seen or heard. Silas, with his street-honed awareness and his quiet, watchful nature, was surprisingly well suited for the task. He learned to move like a ghost, his bare feet now accustomed to the smooth chill of marble floors. He learned to listen with acute precision, absorbing conversations, discerning true meanings from polite platitudes. He learned the intricate dance of courtly life, the shifting alliances, the subtle betrayals, the endless pursuit of power and favor. He served Lucius diligently, his existence a silent, watchful presence. He saw the senators and powerful figures who visited the villa, observed their negotiations, their veiled threats, their calculated smiles. He saw the ambitions that drove them, the fears that haunted them. He learned that the world of the powerful, for all its outward splendor, was just as brutal, just as unforgiving, as the streets he had left behind. Only the stakes were higher, the falls more dramatic, the consequences more absolute. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, then years. Silas grew, his body hardening, his mind sharpening. He remained a cubicularius, his discreet efficiency making him invaluable to Lucius. He had entered the world of the powerful, a world of emperors and senators, where every meal was a feast, every garment a luxury. But the price of entry was a constant vigilance, a perpetual awareness of the shadows that lurked within the keep's stone walls, shadows that could consume even the most powerful. He often thought of his old life, the grimy streets, the raw hunger. He had exchanged one set of dangers for another, one set of scars for a new, more insidious kind. He had dined with emperors, yes, but the taste on his tongue was often fear, and the silence in the grand halls was often broken by the whispers of death. He was still just a boy, thrust into a world far beyond his comprehension, and the true price of his new life was about to become agonizingly clear, preparing him for the chilling whispers that lurked behind laurel curtains. Story 2: Whispers Behind the Laurel Curtains. Silas, once a street rat clinging to the desperate edges of survival around the Colosseum, had long since traded the dust of the arena for the polished marble of Senator Lucius Valerius's villa. His unexpected act of heroism, a clumsy tug on a senator's cloak that miraculously averted an assassin's dagger, had thrust him into a world of bewildering luxury and intricate, unspoken rules. He had become a cubicularius, a chamber servant, a silent shadow moving through the inner sanctums of power, privy to conversations, glances, and gestures that held the true weight of Roman ambition. He had dined with emperors, yes, metaphorically and sometimes literally, but the taste on his tongue was often fear, and the perceived safety of his new life was perpetually haunted by the shadows within the keep's stone walls. Now, as years passed and the boy matured into a young man, these shadows deepened, revealing the chilling reality of whispers behind the laurel curtains. Years had woven themselves into the fabric of Silas's new life, each one adding a new layer of polish to his manners, a new subtlety to his observations. He was no longer the trembling orphan. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his presence almost imperceptible, a ghost in the opulent halls. His bare feet, once accustomed to the rough cobblestones, now glided silently across mosaic floors. He learned Latin, not just the common tongue, but the nuanced, intricate language of the elite, the words chosen for their double meanings, their hidden barbs. He learned to read the shifting expressions on a senator's face, the subtle tensing of a guard's jaw, the meaning behind a dismissive flick of a noblewoman's wrist. He was a master of observation, seeing everything, hearing everything, yet seemingly nothing at all. This was the core of his survival, the key to his continued existence in a world that devoured the unwary. Senator Lucius Valerius, his patron, was a man of immense power, but also of profound secrets. Silas served him faithfully, pouring wine, arranging scrolls, attending to personal needs, always present, always silent. He watched Lucius navigate the treacherous waters of the Senate, forming alliances, crushing rivals, always seeking to expand his influence. Silas saw the masks they wore, the smiles that never reached their eyes, the embraces that felt colder than ice. He learned that the world of the powerful, for all its outward splendor, was just as brutal, just as unforgiving, as the streets he had left behind. Only the stakes were higher, the falls more dramatic, the consequences more absolute. Assassination attempts, he now understood, were merely one tool in a vast arsenal of political warfare. His position as a cubicularius placed him in a unique, perilous vantage point. He was a silent confidant, a keeper of unspoken truths. He saw the illicit lovers slipping in and out of chambers, heard the hushed conversations about land deals and senatorial votes. He witnessed the arrogance of young nobles, the weary cynicism of old veterans, the desperate ambition of those clawing their way up the social ladder. He understood that the grand narratives of Rome, the public triumphs and the solemn ceremonies, were merely a thin veil over a churning cauldron of private desires, petty jealousies, and ruthless power plays. The air behind the elegant laurel curtains, meant to signify privacy and luxury, was thick with unspoken threats. But even amidst the usual ebb and flow of courtly intrigue, a new, unsettling current began to emerge. It centered around the Empress Livia, the seemingly virtuous and politically astute wife of the aging Emperor Tiberius. Livia was a formidable woman, whose influence over Tiberius was whispered to be absolute. She was a master of subtle manipulation, her power exerted through quiet suggestion and unwavering determination. Silas, in his quiet observations, had always found her a figure of awe, a woman who seemed to embody the very essence of Roman power and dignity. However, a series of seemingly unrelated incidents began to prick Silas's acute awareness. A courier, usually meticulous and discreet, was found dead in a side street, his dispatch case missing. A minor noble, known for his loose tongue and his gambling debts, vanished without a trace, his disappearance attributed to debt collectors. A respected yet outspoken general suddenly fell ill with a mysterious wasting sickness, his robust health fading with terrifying speed. Individually, these events might be dismissed as the usual grim realities of Roman life. But to Silas, who saw the hidden threads connecting disparate elements, they felt like pieces of a larger, more sinister pattern. His suspicions began to coalesce around letters. As a cubicularius, part of his duties involved preparing and organizing correspondence, both incoming and outgoing, for Senator Lucius. He handled hundreds of scrolls, from mundane household accounts to sensitive senatorial dispatches. But increasingly, he noticed a peculiar pattern. Certain letters, addressed to or from the Empress Livia, seemed to bypass the usual channels. They arrived discreetly, often carried by anonymous couriers who vanished as quickly as they appeared. Their seals were intricate, unique, and their content, when Silas managed to catch a fleeting glimpse, seemed to consist of cryptic phrases, veiled instructions, and references to specific targets. One night, while meticulously organizing scrolls in Lucius's private study, a scroll from Livia slipped from his hand, unrolling slightly as it hit the marble floor. His eyes, quick and well-trained, caught a flash of a name: Cassius Nero. Cassius Nero was a notorious assassin, a ghost of a man, wanted by the Praetorian Guard for a series of high-profile murders years ago. He was thought to be long dead, or at least, vanished into the farthest reaches of the empire. The idea that his name, a chilling symbol of ruthlessness, would appear in correspondence from the Empress was utterly shocking, profoundly unsettling. Silas quickly re-rolled the scroll, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt the cold touch of fear, deeper and more insidious than any he had known in the streets. This was not merely political maneuvering. This was something darker, something deadly. The Empress Livia, the virtuous figure of Roman dignity, was corresponding with a known assassin, and the pattern of disappearances and sudden illnesses suddenly made horrifying sense. She was systematically removing obstacles, eliminating threats, securing her power with a chilling ruthlessness that transcended the written law. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of overheard conversations, subtle glances between high-ranking officials, and the nervous whispers of other servants. He remembered the sudden illness of the general, known for his opposition to certain senatorial appointments Livia had favored. He recalled the courier who vanished, likely carrying a message that went astray, and the young noble who gambled recklessly and spoke too freely of Livia's alleged manipulations. Each piece clicked into place, forming a terrifying mosaic of calculated murder, all hidden behind the impenetrable facade of imperial power. Silas was a cubicularius, a shadow. His role was to observe, not to act. To speak of such a discovery, to reveal the Empress's chilling secret, would be absolute suicide. He would be silenced, swiftly and brutally, his body discarded like refuse in a forgotten alleyway. The powerful, he knew, did not tolerate inconvenient truths. But silence, he also understood, had its own price. To remain silent was to be complicit, to allow the unseen hand of murder to continue its grim work. It was a moral dilemma that gnawed at his young soul, a burden far heavier than any hunger he had known. The days that followed were a torment. Silas moved through the villa, performing his duties with meticulous care, but his mind was a whirlwind of terrifying possibilities. Every face seemed to hold a hidden secret, every shadow a lurking danger. He watched Empress Livia during her visits to the villa. Her serene smile, her dignified posture, now seemed to him like a grotesque mask, hiding the chilling ruthlessness beneath. He saw her interact with Emperor Tiberius, an aging, increasingly frail man, whose reliance on Livia seemed absolute. A terrifying thought began to form in Silas's mind. Was the emperor himself safe? Or was he merely a pawn in Livia's ultimate game, a tool to be discarded when his usefulness waned? He had to decide. A wrong decision could cost him his life. But a decision not made could cost many others. He was just a boy, an orphan from the streets, thrust into a world of imperial power and deadly intrigue. He possessed no allies, no one he could truly trust with such a horrifying secret. Senator Lucius, his patron, was a powerful man, but he was also deeply entangled in the courtly web. To reveal such a truth to Lucius might implicate him, or worse, put Silas directly into Livia's crosshairs. One night, as he lay on his simple pallet, The soft rustle of the laurel curtains around his sleeping nook seemed to mock him, whispering of the deadly secrets they concealed. The weight of the scrolls, the chilling name of Cassius Nero, the pattern of disappearances, it all pressed down on him, suffocating him with the immensity of the truth. He understood with terrifying clarity that he was now an unwilling player in a game of empires, a game where the stakes were lives and the rules were written in blood. A decision, however terrifying, however perilous, had to be made. He had discovered the whispers behind the laurel curtains, and now he carried the burden of their truth, a truth that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of the Roman Empire. The silence, he knew, would only last so long before the palace's hidden truths demanded to be heard, leading to the terrifying revelation of a statue that wept blood. Story 3: The Statue That Wept Blood. Silas, once a street rat, now a silent shadow in Senator Lucius Valerius's opulent villa, carried a burden far heavier than any hunger he had known. He had, through sheer chance and an acute eye for detail, stumbled upon the terrifying truth. Empress Livia, the seemingly virtuous consort of Emperor Tiberius, was a ruthless orchestrator of assassinations, her power secured by the chilling efficiency of a hired killer, Cassius Nero. The knowledge, a poison in his own mind, left him trapped between the perilous silence of complicity and the certain death of revelation. The shadows within the keep's stone walls, once merely a metaphor, now felt like a suffocating reality, and the whispers behind the laurel curtains had turned into screams in his own soul. He had to decide. A decision not made could cost many lives, and the very stability of an empire. He was still just a boy, thrust into a world far beyond his comprehension, and the true price of his new life was about to become agonizingly clear, preparing him for the chilling mystery of a statue that wept blood. The days that followed Silas's horrifying discovery were a torment of internal debate. He moved through the villa, performing his duties with meticulous care, but his mind was a whirlwind of terrifying possibilities. Every face seemed to hold a hidden secret, every shadow a lurking danger. He watched Empress Livia during her infrequent visits to the villa. Her serene smile, her dignified posture, now seemed to him like a grotesque mask, hiding the chilling ruthlessness beneath. He saw her interact with Emperor Tiberius, an aging, increasingly frail man, whose reliance on Livia seemed absolute. A terrifying thought continued to form in Silas's mind. Was the emperor himself safe? Or was he merely a pawn in Livia's ultimate game, a tool to be discarded when his usefulness waned, just like the inconvenient courtiers and generals? Silas was utterly alone with his knowledge. He possessed no allies he could truly trust with such a horrifying secret. Senator Lucius, his patron, was a powerful man, but he was also deeply entangled in the courtly web. To reveal such a truth to Lucius might implicate him, or worse, put Silas directly into Livia's crosshairs. The dangers were too immense, the consequences too absolute. He was just a boy, an orphan from the streets, thrust into a world of imperial power and deadly intrigue. He had discovered the whispers behind the laurel curtains, and now he carried the burden of their truth. He understood with terrifying clarity that he was now an unwilling player in a game of empires, a game where the stakes were lives and the rules were written in blood. He desperately sought a way to act, a way to expose the truth without signing his own death warrant. His torment, however, was about to find an unexpected public manifestation. One sweltering morning, a ripple of frantic whispers turned into outright shouts, tearing through the usual clamor of Rome. News spread like wildfire, carried by breathless merchants and terrified citizens. The statue of Apollo in the Pantheon had begun to weep. Not tears, but blood. The Pantheon, that magnificent temple to all gods, was a central pillar of Roman faith and power. The statue of Apollo, patron god of prophecy and healing, was revered. For such an effigy to weep blood was an omen of the gravest kind, a terrifying sign of divine displeasure, or worse, a dark prophecy of impending disaster. Panic, raw and primal, seized the city. Citizens flocked to the Pantheon, their faces contorted in fear and awe, witnessing the impossible spectacle. Whispers of divine wrath, of curses, of the empire's imminent downfall, spread through the streets faster than any legion. Emperor Tiberius, already struggling with his increasing frailty and paranoia, was deeply troubled by the omens. The Praetorian Guard, usually a symbol of unwavering control, struggled to contain the hysterical crowds. The Senate, a body usually steeped in political maneuvering, was now consumed by fear and desperate pleas for divine intervention. Sacrifices were ordered, elaborate rituals performed, all in a desperate attempt to appease the angry gods. It was in this atmosphere of escalating panic that Senator Lucius Valerius, seeking to impress the emperor and perhaps subtly undermine Livia's perceived influence over religious affairs, made a surprising move. He proposed a formal investigation into the weeping statue. Not a spiritual inquiry, but a practical one. He needed a discreet, intelligent individual, someone who could observe without drawing attention, who could uncover the truth without causing further panic. His gaze, surprisingly, fell upon Silas. Silas, now a young man known for his quiet efficiency and his uncanny ability to observe without being noticed, was summoned. Lucius, his face grim, explained the task. "The emperor is troubled, Silas. The people are gripped by superstition. Go to the Pantheon. Observe. See what others miss. Find the truth behind this divine manifestation. But be discreet. Utmost discretion. What you find is for my ears alone." He handed Silas a senatorial signet ring, a pass that would grant him access, and a small pouch of coins. Silas understood the unspoken weight of the mission. Lucius was not looking for a miracle. He was looking for an explanation, something tangible to quell the public hysteria, something that might even serve a political purpose against Livia, whose influence relied heavily on projecting an image of divine favor. This was a direct, dangerous task that could easily lead to his discovery and his death. But it was also an opportunity to prove his worth, to delve deeper into the hidden machinations of power, and perhaps to find a way to use his skills for a purpose beyond mere survival. Silas, disguised in the simple tunic of a temple acolyte, gained access to the Pantheon. The air inside was thick with incense and the desperate murmurs of prayers. The massive bronze doors, usually open to the sky, were now partially closed, creating an eerie, subdued light that filtered through the oculus, illuminating the interior in dramatic shafts. And there, at the heart of it all, stood the statue of Apollo, tears of crimson still visible on its marble cheeks, a chilling testament to the miracle. He spent days observing, melting into the background, a silent shadow among the frantic priests and the desperate pilgrims. He watched the temple acolytes, the guards, the constant stream of high-ranking officials who came to pay their respects. He noticed subtle details. The odd placement of a small, polished bronze basin behind the statue. The curious behavior of a particular temple attendant, a man with overly clean hands and a nervous flicker in his eyes. The almost imperceptible scent of something metallic, not blood, but something else, something sharp and acrid, clinging to the air around the statue's base, masked by the overwhelming frankincense. One night, under the cover of deepest darkness, long after the last priest had departed and the Pantheon was truly silent, Silas returned. He used his street-honed skills to slip past the few remaining guards, his movements silent as a cat. The moon, a thin sliver of silver, cast long, distorted shadows across the marble floor. He approached the statue, his heart pounding, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. He touched the marble, smooth and cold, then ran his fingers over the subtle red streaks. It was unmistakably blood, but it was too perfectly placed, too consistently flowing. He found it then. hidden behind the statue, partially obscured by a decorative wreath. A thin, almost invisible channel, carefully carved into the stone base, leading from a small, concealed compartment. Inside the compartment, he discovered a minuscule, cleverly disguised bladder made of animal skin, filled with what appeared to be dried animal blood and a small amount of liquid. And beside it, a finely crafted, almost invisible bronze needle, designed to slowly prick the bladder, releasing the tears at a controlled rate. This was no miracle. This was a device. A meticulously engineered fraud. The revelation hit Silas with the force of a physical blow. This was not divine displeasure. This was a human hand, manipulating belief, exploiting fear. But whose? The question burned in his mind. He examined the device more closely. The craftsmanship was exquisite, far beyond the skill of a common artisan. This was the work of someone with resources, with access to the inner workings of the temple, with a profound understanding of mechanics and human psychology. Someone powerful. He remembered the letters. The Empress Livia, Cassius Nero, the pattern of eliminations. And then he made the chilling connection. The general who had suddenly fallen ill with a wasting sickness had been a devout worshipper of Apollo, known for his stern adherence to traditional Roman values and his subtle, yet consistent, opposition to Livia's increasingly audacious political maneuvers. He had been a symbol of the old guard, a voice of caution against Livia's expanding influence. And now, this miracle was designed to create chaos, to undermine public confidence, perhaps even to hint at divine judgment against those who clung to old traditions. It was a message, broadcast to the masses, that the gods themselves favored a new order, Livia's order. Silas meticulously dismantled the device, removing the bladder and the needle, leaving no trace of his intrusion. He then carefully sealed the hidden compartment, ensuring no one would suspect its previous use. He carried the damning evidence in a small pouch, the weight of it pressing down on him. He had found the truth, but the truth was terrifying. This was not a random act of superstition. It was a calculated act of political manipulation, a deliberate exploitation of public fear, a monstrous lie designed to strengthen Livia's grip on power. The statue that wept blood was merely a pawn in a larger game, a terrifying testament to how easily faith could be twisted, how quickly fear could be weaponized, and how profound the shadows within the keep's stone walls truly were. He returned to Senator Lucius, his face a mask of carefully constructed calm. He presented the dismantled device, the small bladder of dried blood, the needle. Lucius, a man of cold intellect, examined them in silence, his eyes narrowing. He listened to Silas's quiet, precise account, his gaze unwavering. When Silas finished, the senator leaned back, his expression unreadable. "A cunning device," Lucius murmured, his voice low, "and a cunning hand behind it." He looked at Silas, a flicker of something new in his eyes, a mixture of respect and a chilling understanding of the danger Silas had placed himself in. The truth, Silas had learned, was a dangerous weapon. He had unveiled a monstrous fraud, a political machination disguised as a divine omen. But he had also discovered the extent of Empress Livia's ruthless ambition, her willingness to subvert even the sacred for power. The statue that wept blood was merely a prelude. The empire was gripped by a deeper, more insidious plague, the plague of corruption and unchecked ambition. And Silas, the orphan boy who had once scavenged for scraps, was now a silent keeper of a truth that could shake the very foundations of Rome, a truth that demanded a deadly response, drawing him inexorably towards a dagger in the grain warehouse. Story 4: The Dagger in the Grain Warehouse. Silas, once a street rat, now a silent shadow in Senator Lucius Valerius's opulent villa, carried a terrifying truth. He had, through sheer chance and an acute eye for detail, stumbled upon Empress Livia's chilling secret, her ruthless orchestration of assassinations to secure power, using the notorious Cassius Nero as her unseen hand. The recent miracle of the statue that wept blood in the Pantheon had been unmasked by Silas as a calculated fraud, a chilling display of political manipulation designed to exploit public fear and strengthen Livia's grip. The knowledge, a poison in his own mind, left him trapped between the perilous silence of complicity and the certain death of revelation. Senator Lucius, cold and calculating, had seen the damning evidence, and in his eyes, Silas saw not just a flicker of respect, but a chilling understanding of the immense danger they were both in. The empire, Silas now knew, was gripped by a deeper, more insidious plague, the plague of corruption and unchecked ambition. And this hidden disease, like a festering wound, was about to manifest in the very lifeblood of Rome. Its grain supply, leading to the discovery of a dagger in the grain warehouse. The days that followed the Pantheon revelation were fraught with a new kind of tension for Silas. He continued his duties as cubicularius, moving silently through Lucius's villa, but his senses were acutely heightened, every shadow a potential threat, every whisper a veiled message. The city of Rome, already reeling from the divine displeasure of the weeping statue, now found itself facing a far more tangible and immediate terror: hunger. A subtle but relentless famine had begun to grip the city, its insidious tendrils reaching into every corner, from the bustling forum to the poorest districts. Grain prices, usually stable, began to skyrocket, leaving the common citizens facing starvation, their meager coins unable to purchase even a small loaf of bread. This was not a natural famine. The harvests had been adequate, the ships from Egypt and Sicily, the granaries of Rome, should have been full. But somehow, the grain, the very sustenance of the populace, was disappearing. Whispers of hoarding, of unscrupulous merchants manipulating prices, began to spread through the crowded streets, turning discontent into a simmering rage. Riots erupted in the poorer districts, quickly suppressed by the Praetorian Guard, but the underlying tension remained, a palpable sense of desperation that permeated the very air of the eternal city. Senator Lucius, usually aloof from such mundane concerns, was deeply troubled. As a prominent figure, the stability of Rome was paramount to his power and influence. A starving populace was a volatile populace, a threat to the delicate balance of the Senate and the emperor's authority. He ordered his trusted agents to investigate the disappearing grain, but their efforts yielded little. The warehouses seemed empty, the markets barren, and the few merchants who still sold grain quoted exorbitant prices, claiming scarcity. It was a well-orchestrated illusion, designed to create maximum profit and maximum despair. One frigid morning, a discovery plunged the city into further unease. A body, that of an unknown man, was found in a remote grain warehouse near the Tiber, a dagger still clutched in his stiff hand. It was a crude, common dagger, the kind carried by a merchant or a laborer, but it was undoubtedly the murder weapon. The warehouse itself, usually teeming with activity, stood eerily silent, its massive wooden doors seemingly untouched. The official report from the Praetorian Guard quickly dismissed it as a lone brigand, a desperate act of robbery gone wrong amidst the famine. But Lucius, his cold intellect already piecing together the subtle clues, suspected otherwise. He sent for Silas. Silas arrived at the warehouse, disguised in the simple tunic of a dock worker, his keen eyes absorbing every detail. The scene was unsettling. The warehouse, vast and cavernous, was indeed almost empty, save for a few scattered sacks of grain and the gruesome presence of the dead man. The official guards, already bored, stood by idly, their attention easily diverted. But Silas noticed the small, almost imperceptible details. A faint, unusual scent of stagnant water mingled with the sweet aroma of grain. The peculiar way a discarded rope lay on the floor, suggesting a struggle. And most importantly, the man's hands. Despite his common attire, his fingers were surprisingly uncalloused, almost soft, not the hands of a typical laborer who would be handling grain sacks. This was no ordinary brigand. Silas remembered Lucius's instructions: see what others miss. He approached the dead man, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The dagger, a common, unremarkable weapon, seemed almost too crude for the precision of the crime. Silas noticed a small, almost invisible symbol etched onto the man's belt buckle, easily overlooked amidst the grime. It was a stylized serpent, coiled around a stalk of wheat. A chilling familiarity. He had seen that symbol before, subtly embroidered on a silken sash worn by a minor nobleman, a known associate of Empress Livia's inner circle. The serpent's coil was tightening its grip on more than just lives. It was strangling the city itself. Silas's investigation, conducted in the shadows and through hushed conversations, quickly led him down a dangerous path. He frequented the taverns near the docks, places where the desperate and the drunken gathered, their tongues loosened by cheap wine. He found a drunken guard, a grizzled veteran of the Praetorian Guard, his mind dulled by repeated libations. The guard, in a moment of drunken bravado, began to boast of extra pay, of special assignments from high-ranking officials to ensure certain deliveries never reached the market. He spoke of vast quantities of grain being diverted, rerouted to hidden granaries outside the city, where it was then sold at exorbitant prices to desperate citizens, all while official records showed no such diversions. The guard, in his drunken stupor, also mentioned a quiet man who coordinated these operations, a man whose presence filled him with an inexplicable dread. Silas pressed him for more details, his questions subtle, his demeanor unassuming. The guard, lost in his drunken haze, unwittingly revealed the chilling truth. The quiet man was none other than Cassius Nero, the Empress Livia's assassin. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The famine was no accident. It was a meticulously orchestrated plot, designed not just for profit, but for political manipulation. By controlling the grain supply, by creating artificial scarcity, Livia could destabilize the city, sow discontent against the Senate, and ultimately consolidate her own power. A starving populace was a desperate populace, easily swayed by promises of food, easily controlled by those who held the keys to the granaries. This was a direct assault on the authority of the Senate, a ruthless play for ultimate control. The dagger in the grain warehouse was not a random act of violence. It was a warning, a message to anyone who dared to interfere with Livia's insidious plan. The dead man was likely a merchant who had either refused to cooperate or attempted to expose the scheme. Silas continued to gather intelligence, venturing into the labyrinthine alleys of the city, using his old street skills to navigate the underworld. He spoke to petty thieves, to desperate beggars, to informants who traded whispers for coins. He learned of routes used to smuggle grain out of the city, of secret granaries hidden in abandoned villas outside the city walls. He saw the faces of the starving citizens, their once vibrant smiles fading into gaunt masks of despair, their hopes crushed by the relentless grip of hunger. The cries echoing from the crowded streets were not from physical pain, but from the agony of starvation, a constant lament that filled the city. The weight of this new truth pressed down on Silas. He had uncovered a conspiracy far grander and more terrifying than he could have imagined. Empress Livia was not just eliminating political rivals. She was systematically destabilizing the empire's lifeblood, manipulating the very survival of its citizens for her own gain. Her ambition knew no bounds, and her ruthlessness extended to the most vulnerable. This was a crime against the very soul of Rome, a betrayal of the trust placed in its rulers. And he, Silas, a former street orphan, was now holding the damning evidence, a truth that could bring the entire Senate to its knees or bury him alive. He returned to Senator Lucius, presenting his findings with his usual quiet precision. The detailed routes of the diverted grain, the locations of the hidden granaries, the names of the seemingly innocuous merchants involved, and most chillingly, the undeniable link to Cassius Nero and, by extension, to Empress Livia. Lucius listened in silence, his cold intellect absorbing every detail. His face, usually unreadable, subtly tightened. He understood the gravity of the situation. This was not merely a crime. It was an act of treason, a direct challenge to the emperor's authority, orchestrated by his own wife. The stakes were unimaginable. Lucius knew that confronting Livia directly with such evidence would be suicidal. Her power was immense, her reach absolute. She would deny everything, and Silas, his lone witness, would disappear without a trace. The Senate, weakened by the famine and riddled with Livia's allies, would be too fearful to act. This required a different strategy, a more subtle approach, a way to expose the truth without directly challenging Livia, to undermine her influence without revealing the full extent of her monstrous ambition. Silas, exhausted but resolute, returned to his duties as cubicularius. He knew the danger. He had unveiled a terrifying truth, but he was still a shadow, a pawn in a game far larger than himself. The dagger in the grain warehouse was not just a symbol of murder. It was a chilling testament to the ruthlessness of power and the lengths to which those consumed by ambition would go. The famine continued to grip Rome, its cries echoing from every street corner, every barren market stall. The smiles of the citizens had long faded, their hopes crushed by hunger and despair. And in the heart of this suffering city, Silas carried his secret, a deadly burden that would inevitably lead to further revelations, perhaps even a statue that would weep real tears of blood, leading him to the hidden chambers beneath the baths of Caracalla. Story 5: Letters to the Lost Legion. Silas, once a street rat, now a ghost in the opulent halls of Senator Lucius Valerius, carried a chilling truth. The famine gripping Rome was no natural disaster. It was a meticulously orchestrated plot, a monstrous manipulation of the grain supply by Empress Livia, aimed at destabilizing the city and consolidating her power. The discovery of a dagger in the grain warehouse was not just a murder, but a warning, a brutal testament to Livia's ruthlessness. Silas had unveiled a terrifying conspiracy, a crime against the very soul of Rome, but the danger of revelation was absolute. Senator Lucius, his cold intellect absorbing every damning detail, understood the immense stakes. The silence he maintained, the carefully calculated non-action, spoke volumes about the viper's nest they navigated. But even as Rome starved and Livia tightened her grip, a new, unsettling mystery began to emerge, carried on the wind from distant, forgotten frontiers: letters to the lost legion. The days following Silas's discovery in the grain warehouse were fraught with a new, heavier tension. The famine continued its insidious grip on Rome, its cries echoing from every street corner, every barren market stall. The smiles of the citizens had long faded, their hopes crushed by hunger and despair. Riots, more frequent and violent, were brutally suppressed by the Praetorian Guard, their presence a stark reminder of the fragile order. Silas moved through his duties, a silent sentinel, his senses acutely attuned to every whisper, every glance. He knew the truth behind the suffering, a truth that burned in his mind, yet remained unspoken, a heavy burden carried in the heart of a former orphan. Senator Lucius, outwardly calm and composed, was working feverishly behind the scenes. He gathered his most trusted agents, men whose loyalty was beyond question, and quietly began to divert small, untraceable shipments of grain to key districts, attempting to alleviate the suffering just enough to prevent utter chaos, without openly challenging Livia. He understood the delicate balance. Exposing Livia directly would be suicidal. Her power was immense, her reach absolute, her ruthlessness chillingly effective. He needed a different strategy, a way to subtly undermine her, to sow seeds of doubt among her allies without drawing her immediate wrath. The dagger in the grain warehouse was proof of her methods, but it also served as a terrifying warning against open opposition. It was during this period of heightened tension, with the city a powder keg of hunger and fear, that Silas stumbled upon another anomaly. Part of his duties as cubicularius involved the meticulous organization of Lucius's private correspondence, including sensitive dispatches from the far-flung reaches of the empire. One morning, amongst a bundle of recent missives from the northern frontier, a batch of letters stood out. Their parchment was old, discolored, and their seals were unfamiliar, almost archaic, yet their content was chillingly clear. They were addressed to Legio IX Hispana, the Ninth Legion, famously known as the Lost Legion. The Ninth Legion. The very name sent a shiver down Silas's spine. 12 years ago, the Ninth had marched north, deep into the barbarian lands of Britannia, on a campaign of conquest. They had marched into the misty wilds, full of Roman pride and ambition, and had simply vanished. Utterly, completely, irrevocably. No survivors, no bodies, no trace. The official reports had concluded they were overwhelmed by barbarian tribes, annihilated, their eagles captured, their memory lost to the unforgiving wilds. Their disappearance had been one of the greatest, most haunting mysteries of the Roman Empire, a dark stain on its otherwise glorious military history. Their memory was a phantom, whispered in hushed tones by old soldiers in taverns, a tale of chilling, unexplained demise. Yet here, in his hands, were letters to them. Not ancient missives, but seemingly recent ones, judging by the quality of the parchment and the freshness of the ink, though meticulously aged to appear older. Their content was fragmented, coded, but hints were clear. Instructions, coordinates, coded references to the return, and veiled promises of glory and vengeance. The parchment, Silas noticed with a growing sense of dread, was subtly stained with what looked like dried blood. Not accidental smears, but almost ritualistic marks, as if the sender was making a grim oath. Silas quickly, discreetly, brought the anomaly to Lucius's attention. The senator's cold intellect, usually impassive, showed a rare flicker of alarm as he examined the letters. "This is impossible," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "The Ninth is dead. Vanished. Forged." But as he read the coded messages, his brow furrowed. The details, obscure and specific, hinted at a knowledge of the Ninth Legion that few outside its highest command would possess. The military precision, the subtle references to forgotten tactics, this was not a simple forgery. Further investigation, conducted through Lucius's most discreet channels, revealed a terrifying truth. The letters were indeed genuine. They were being sent from a hidden network within Rome itself, reaching the distant frontier through a complex web of intermediaries and secret couriers. And the recipient was not the ghost of a legion, but a living, breathing force. The Lost Legion had never truly died. They had gone rogue. They had gone silent. And now they were being subtly reactivated, their return meticulously orchestrated. But for what purpose? Lucius, with Silas at his side, delved deeper into the mystery. They discovered a pattern of unusual troop movements along the northern frontiers, subtle shifts in barbarian activity that seemed almost orchestrated. Raids that were too precise, movements that seemed too coordinated for simple tribal aggression. It was all part of a larger design, a grand, terrifying chess game played on the sprawling map of the empire. The connection to Empress Livia was chillingly undeniable. The coded references in the letters, the subtle choice of couriers, the very existence of a secret network capable of reaching a supposedly vanished legion, all pointed back to her. Silas, remembering the name of Cassius Nero, the Empress's assassin, who moved like a ghost outside the law, wondered if he had played a part in this. Was the Ninth Legion being held, coerced, or perhaps were they willing participants in Livia's grander scheme? The terrifying possibility emerged. Livia, not content with manipulating Rome's internal affairs through famine, was now reaching for control of its military, aiming to wield an entire legion as her personal weapon. The motivations were chillingly clear. A rogue legion, supposedly lost to the barbarians, could be resurrected at will. They would be fiercely loyal, bound by a terrible secret, and utterly ruthless. They could be deployed against political rivals, against rebellious provinces, or, if Livia's ambition truly knew no bounds, against the very emperor himself. The thought of such a force, loyal only to the Empress, operating in the shadows, sent a shiver down Lucius's spine. This was a threat far greater than any internal conspiracy. This was an empire within an empire, loyal only to Livia. The famine in Rome, once a separate horror, now seemed intricately linked to this new, terrifying discovery. A city weakened by hunger would be a city ripe for manipulation, a populace desperate enough to accept any savior, even one who emerged from the shadows with a lost legion at her back. Livia was systematically weakening the empire from within, then planning to control it from without. The letters to the Lost Legion were not just intelligence. They were a blueprint for domination, a chilling promise of a future where Livia's control would be absolute. Silas continued his work for Lucius, but his perspective had shifted profoundly. He was no longer just witnessing courtly intrigue. He was seeing the grand, terrifying scale of imperial ambition, its cold, calculating ruthlessness. He saw how the threads of power, money, and military might were woven together, creating a tapestry of control that stretched from the emperor's palace to the farthest frontiers. And at its heart, the Empress Livia, a figure of serene dignity, pulled the strings, her unseen hand orchestrating a symphony of betrayal and control. The stakes were immense. Rome was not just suffering from famine and plague. It was teetering on the brink of an internal takeover, a quiet coup orchestrated by the very woman who should have been its most loyal guardian. Silas, the orphaned boy, once invisible in the shadows of the Colosseum, now found himself a silent, unwilling participant in this monumental struggle. He held a truth that could shake the very foundations of the Roman Empire, a truth revealed in ancient parchments stained with blood, whispering of vengeance and a terrifying return. The shadows within the keep's stone walls were deepening, stretching to encompass the entire empire, and the chill of this realization was colder than any winter wind. The mystery of the Lost Legion was not just a historical anomaly. It was a living, breathing threat, and its revelation would inevitably lead him to the secrets hidden beneath the baths of Caracalla. Story 6: Beneath the Baths of Caracalla. Silas, once a street rat, now a ghost in Senator Lucius Valerius's opulent villa, carried a terrifying burden. He had exposed Empress Livia's monstrous plot to destabilize Rome through engineered famine, a plot underscored by the murder in the grain warehouse. But the deeper horror lay in the discovery of letters to the Lost Legion, missives suggesting the supposedly annihilated Ninth Legion was not only alive but being secretly reactivated, poised to be Livia's personal instrument of power. Senator Lucius, his cold intellect absorbing every damning detail, understood the immense stakes. The empire, Silas now knew, was not just gripped by plague and famine. It was teetering on the brink of an internal takeover, orchestrated by the very woman meant to be its guardian. The shadows within the keep's stone walls were deepening, stretching across the entire empire. And it was this intricate web of ancient intrigue that would now lead Silas to the most unexpected of places, beneath the baths of Caracalla. The days following the revelation of the Lost Legion's letters were fraught with a new, heavier tension for Silas. He continued his duties as cubicularius, moving silently through Lucius's villa, but his senses were acutely heightened, every shadow a potential threat, every whisper a veiled message. The city of Rome, still reeling from the divine displeasure of the weeping statue and the brutal grip of famine, seemed to hold its breath. The omnipresent fear was a palpable entity, a chilling presence that clung to every citizen, turning discontent into a simmering rage, only barely suppressed by the Praetorian Guard. Senator Lucius, outwardly calm and composed, was working feverishly behind the scenes. He understood that the knowledge of a rogue legion, poised to strike, was a secret of immense danger. He needed more information, more leverage, a way to counter Livia's insidious plan without openly challenging her. He tasked Silas with a new, even more perilous mission: to quietly investigate any unusual activity around Rome's ancient infrastructure, any overlooked anomalies that might tie into Livia's vast, shadowy network. The Empress, Lucius reasoned, would leave no stone unturned in her quest for ultimate power. Silas, with his street-honed observational skills, began to broaden his silent surveillance. He frequented the city's vast public spaces, its markets, its temples, its grand monumental structures. He was a master of invisibility, seeing without being seen, listening without being heard. The famine continued to grip Rome, its cries echoing from every street corner, every barren market stall. The smiles of the citizens had long faded, their hopes crushed by hunger and despair. And in the heart of this suffering city, Silas carried his secret, a deadly burden that weighed heavier than any physical hunger. It was in the labyrinthine grandeur of the baths of Caracalla that Silas's acute awareness once again detected a chilling anomaly. The baths were a marvel of Roman engineering and luxury, a sprawling complex of bathing halls, gymnasiums, libraries, and gardens, open to all citizens, a place where social classes mingled and the everyday life of Rome unfolded. They were a symbol of Roman might and communal well-being, an engineering marvel that had stood for centuries, their very permanence suggesting stability. Yet, a subtle unease began to emanate from beneath its imposing structures. Recent, unseasonal tremors, minor earthquakes that had rattled the city a few weeks prior, had left faint cracks in some of the bath's lesser-used corridors and underground service tunnels. Officially, these were being repaired by slaves and laborers under the supervision of the city's curators aquarum, water superintendents. But Silas noticed something more: the hurried, almost secretive movements of certain laborers at odd hours. The occasional glimpse of unfamiliar faces, not typical public slaves, among the work crews. The sudden, unexplained redirection of water flow in certain underground channels, ostensibly for repairs, but seeming to serve another, hidden purpose. He began to shadow the work crews, using his old street skills to slip unnoticed into the service tunnels beneath the massive complex. The air down there was damp, heavy, filled with the scent of stagnant water and ancient stone. The tunnels were a vast, intricate network, an unseen city beneath the city, designed to carry water, heat, and waste. Most were dark, choked with grime, and rarely visited by anyone but maintenance slaves. It was in one of these forgotten, sealed-off sections that Silas discovered it. The tremors, while minor, had revealed a hidden chamber, a section of an older, much more ancient structure, buried deep beneath the Caracalla baths. A section that had clearly been sealed off for centuries, long before the baths were even built. The entrance, a rough, uneven break in the stone wall, was crudely concealed by loose debris and old scaffolding. It was clear from the fresh marks that someone had very recently broken through. Silas, his heart pounding, slipped through the narrow opening. The air inside the hidden chamber was cold, stale, and unervingly quiet. It was an ancient space, clearly predating the baths, its walls adorned with faded carvings of unknown deities and strange, interlocking symbols similar to those he had glimpsed in the journal detailing the dead field curse. In the center of the chamber stood a massive, circular stone altar, stained with what looked like ancient, dried blood. But it was not the altar that seized his attention. It was the bronze door. Set into one of the chamber walls, it was large, intricately carved, and clearly designed to be impenetrable. Its surface was covered with more of the strange, interlocking symbols, and at its center, a heavy, ornate lock, unlike any Roman mechanism he had ever seen. The door was ancient, sealed for centuries, but Silas noticed faint, recent scratches around the lock and a thin, almost invisible line of freshly disturbed dust along its base. Someone had been trying to open it, or perhaps had already opened it. And then he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, a rhythmic metallic scraping coming from directly behind the bronze door. It was the sound of tools, of work, of something being excavated or constructed, deep within the earth, far beneath the bustling life of the baths above. It came in short, measured bursts, as if the workers were being incredibly careful, incredibly secret. This was no ordinary repair crew. This was a clandestine operation, conducted in the deepest shadows of Rome, beneath one of its most public spaces. Silas remembered the letters to the Lost Legion. He remembered Cassius Nero, the Empress's assassin, and the ruthlessness with which Livia pursued her goals. He remembered the strange, coded references to the return. What connection could a hidden chamber beneath the baths have to a vanished legion? What terrifying secret lay behind that bronze door? He spent several nights infiltrating the baths, slipping past the sleeping guards and the few remaining repair crews, to return to the hidden chamber. He observed the movements of the men working behind the bronze door. They were disciplined, efficient, moving with the quiet precision of soldiers. And they were not city laborers. Their attire was simple, unadorned, but their gaits, their very bearing, spoke of military training. They were legionaries, or at least men who had been. He began to notice patterns. Certain workers would arrive at odd hours, carrying small, heavy satchels. They would disappear behind the bronze door, and sounds of muffled work would resume. Later, they would emerge, their satchels lighter, and leave the baths as silently as they had entered. Silas, using his unparalleled stealth, managed to follow one of these men. He led Silas not to a villa, but to a series of secluded, well-guarded safe houses on the outskirts of the city, places where official records would never mark their presence. These were not the homes of ordinary citizens. These were clandestine outposts. He managed to intercept a discarded scrap of parchment near one of these safe houses. It was a fragment of a report, written in a military hand, riddled with codes. But a few words were clear: supplies requisitioned, recruitment progressing, orders from the Empress. And then, a chilling detail, references to Phase 2 of Operation Phoenix. Phoenix, the bird of rebirth, the legendary creature that rose from ashes. The Lost Legion was indeed rising. The truth solidified in Silas's mind with horrifying clarity. Empress Livia was not just manipulating Rome's grain supply. She was preparing for a military coup, a full-scale takeover of the empire. The lost Ninth Legion, supposedly annihilated, had been secretly preserved, retrained, and was now being reactivated, supplied, and augmented with new recruits. They were Livia's personal army, loyal only to her, operating in absolute secrecy. The hidden chamber beneath the baths of Caracalla was not merely an ancient ruin. It was a secret staging ground, a clandestine hub for this massive, terrifying operation. Perhaps a hidden armory, a command center, or even a training ground for those loyal only to her. The sounds he heard behind the bronze door were the sounds of an empire being quietly dismantled from within. He returned to Senator Lucius, his face grim. He presented his findings: the nature of the hidden chamber, the sounds from behind the bronze door, the intercepted report, and the undeniable link to Livia and the resurrected Ninth Legion. Lucius listened in stony silence, his cold intellect absorbing the terrifying scale of the conspiracy. His face, usually a mask of control, showed a rare flicker of profound alarm. "An entire legion," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Hidden. Controlled by her. It defies belief." The stakes were immense. Livia was preparing to seize absolute power, not through subtle political maneuvering, but through sheer military force. The famine, the weeping statue, the assassinations, all were merely diversions, calculated chaos designed to weaken Rome, to sow fear and discontent, while she meticulously assembled her true weapon. Silas, the former street orphan, had now uncovered a truth that could bring the entire Roman Empire to its knees. He was a silent witness to a monumental act of treason, a rebellion from within the very heart of the power structure. The shadows within the keep's stone walls now stretched across the entire empire, and the chill of this realization was colder than any Roman winter. He knew his life was in immense danger. Livia would stop at nothing to protect her secret. He was a small, insignificant cog in this vast machine of power and betrayal, yet he held a truth that could shatter it all. The secrets beneath the baths of Caracalla were not just architectural curiosities. They were a chilling testament to Livia's unbridled ambition, a dark prophecy of Rome's imminent downfall. His discovery would inevitably lead him to a new, even more perilous path, drawing him into the orbit of the emperor himself and the chilling reality of the emperor's twin. Story 7: The Emperor's Twin. Silas, once a street rat, now a ghost in Senator Lucius Valerius's opulent villa, carried a terrifying burden. He had exposed Empress Livia's monstrous plot to destabilize Rome through engineered famine, a plot underscored by the murder in the grain warehouse. But the deeper horror lay in the discovery of letters to the Lost Legion, missives confirming the supposedly annihilated Ninth Legion was not only alive but being secretly reactivated, poised to be Livia's personal instrument of power. The secrets hidden beneath the baths of Caracalla, a clandestine staging ground for this monumental military coup, had cemented the chilling truth. Livia was preparing to seize absolute power through sheer force, and the empire itself teetered on the brink of civil war. Senator Lucius, his cold intellect absorbing every damning detail, knew the immense stakes. The shadows within the keep's stone walls now stretched across the entire empire, and the chill of this realization was colder than any Roman winter. And it was this intricate web of ancient intrigue that would now force Silas into the most dangerous masquerade imaginable, the role of the emperor's twin. The days following the discovery beneath the baths of Caracalla were fraught with an unbearable tension. Rome was a powder keg. The famine continued its relentless grip, its cries echoing from every street corner. Whispers of widespread discontent mingled with the terrifying rumors of the plague, which still claimed lives in both hovels and palaces. Senator Lucius, a man of profound political cunning, understood that direct confrontation with Livia was suicidal. Her power was immense, her reach absolute, her ruthlessness chillingly effective. He needed a strategy, a means to expose her without risking immediate annihilation, a subtle dagger to sever the serpent's coil. He needed a way to counter her ultimate weapon, a loyal, hidden legion. Silas, now an indispensable part of Lucius's clandestine efforts, continued his silent surveillance, his every sense acutely tuned to the shifting currents of fear and ambition in Rome. He was a master of invisibility, seeing without being seen, listening without being heard. He gathered intelligence, tracked couriers, and pieced together fragments of information that painted an increasingly grim picture of Livia's grand design. He understood the stakes intimately. This was no longer just about survival. It was about the very soul of Rome. The focal point of Livia's ultimate plan, Silas deduced, was the emperor himself. Emperor Tiberius, aging and increasingly frail, was withdrawing further into his paranoid seclusion, relying almost entirely on Livia. He was a figurehead, a puppet in her hands, his authority a mere facade for her iron will. The idea that Livia might orchestrate his natural demise, to place her own chosen successor, perhaps even Roland, the bastard heir, if he proved pliant enough, on the throne, was not just a possibility, but an increasingly likely probability. It was during this period of heightened vigilance that an event of terrifying significance occurred. An assassination attempt, failed yet chillingly precise, was made on Emperor Tiberius during a rare public procession through the Forum. A seemingly innocuous citizen lunged from the crowd, a poisoned dart glinting in the sunlight, aiming for the emperor's chest. The Praetorian Guard reacted swiftly, But the dart, though deflected by a quick-thinking guard, grazed the Emperor's arm, causing immediate distress. The assailant, a shadowy figure, melted into the chaotic crowd before he could be apprehended, leaving behind only the cold dread of failure. The city plunged into a new wave of fear. An attack on the Emperor, in broad daylight, was an unthinkable sacrilege. Livia, playing the role of the grieving wife and devoted Empress, outwardly displayed profound shock and sorrow. She ordered immediate, ruthless investigations, punishing any guards who showed even the slightest laxity. But to Silas, who had seen her true face, her calculated ruthlessness, the assassination attempt felt off. Too clumsy. Too public. Almost as if it were designed to fail, or to serve a deeper purpose. Then, a new, unsettling rumor began to circulate through the villa, carried by hushed whispers among the upper servants and retinue. It spoke of Valerius Aulus, a humble, unknown artist from a distant province, who had been quietly brought to Rome months ago. A man of remarkable, almost uncanny, resemblance to the Emperor Tiberius. A look-alike. A doppelganger. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying clarity for Silas. The true purpose of Valerius Aulus, Silas deduced, was not to replace the Emperor permanently. It was for a masquerade. A dangerous, politically charged theatrical performance. The assassination attempt, though failed, was not meant to kill Tiberius. It was meant to highlight his vulnerability, to create a climate of fear and uncertainty, and to justify a new, even more profound level of imperial seclusion. Livia would use the threat to convince Tiberius to withdraw entirely from public life, citing security concerns. And then, she would use Valerius Aulus as his double. This was the chilling brilliance of Livia's plan. A figurehead emperor, publicly seen but secretly controlled. Valerius Aulus, the emperor's twin, would appear at public functions, make brief, carefully choreographed pronouncements, and sign documents, all under Livia's direct guidance. Meanwhile, the real Tiberius, sick and paranoid, would be confined, increasingly isolated, and eventually, subtly eliminated. The transition of power would be seamless, bloodless, for the public at least, and utterly untraceable. Livia would rule Rome from the shadows, wielding absolute power through her imperial puppet. Silas presented this chilling hypothesis to Senator Lucius. He explained the uncanny resemblance, the artist's sudden appearance in Rome, the subtle timing of the assassination attempt. Lucius listened in stony silence, his cold intellect absorbing every detail. "A cunning plan," he murmured, his voice low, a rare flicker of admiration for Livia's twisted genius in his eyes. "So, the Emperor's twin is merely a tool. A face behind a mask." But this new discovery plunged Silas into an even deeper well of despair. He was no longer just dealing with a simple conspiracy. He was confronting a terrifying subversion of identity, a corruption of the very symbol of imperial authority. The Emperor's face, the sacred embodiment of Rome, was to become a lie. And the artist Valerius Aulus was to become a living ghost, forced to live a life that was not his own, a mere reflection in a deadly mirror. The danger for Silas himself intensified exponentially. He was now privy to a secret that could destroy Livia's grand deception. He was a threat, a loose thread in her meticulously woven tapestry of lies. His every movement, his every glance, felt scrutinized. He felt the weight of unseen eyes, the chilling presence of Cassius Nero, the Empress's elusive assassin, hovering in the shadows, waiting for his opportunity to strike. Silas began to track Valerius Aulus discreetly. He discovered that the artist was kept in a heavily guarded, secluded wing of the imperial palace, his existence a state secret. He was being meticulously coached, trained to mimic Tiberius's mannerisms, his gait, his voice, even his subtle facial tics. He was being transformed, slowly, agonizingly, into a living replica of the emperor, his own identity systematically erased. The process was a psychological torture, a subtle but brutal form of imprisonment, leaving profound scars on the soul of the artist. The emperor's twin. The very concept was horrifying. It underscored the ephemeral nature of identity in a world where power was absolute. A man's face, his very being, could be stolen, repurposed, made into a tool for manipulation. This was a tragedy that resonated deeply with Silas, the orphaned boy who had once struggled to define his own identity in the brutal anonymity of the streets. Silas understood that Livia's plan was not simply about eliminating Tiberius. It was about absolute control, about wielding the very image of power. The emperor's twin was not just a stand-in. He was a silent testament to Livia's terrifying ambition, a chilling symbol of her ability to subvert reality itself. This was the ultimate betrayal, a lie at the very heart of the empire. He reported his findings to Lucius. The senator listened, his face grim, his silence profound. He understood that this level of deception, this subversion of imperial authority, was an unprecedented threat to the very fabric of Rome. This was not a mere political rival. This was a force that threatened to unravel the empire from within. The immediate problem remained: how to expose Livia without triggering a civil war, or worse, their own swift demise. Lucius, with his profound understanding of Roman society, began to formulate a new strategy. He needed to find a weakness, a chink in Livia's impenetrable armor, a way to reveal the truth to the right people at the right time. He needed to find a lever that could move an empire. Silas, the former street rat, was now not just a witness to imperial intrigue. He was an active, unwilling participant in a game where his own life was a constant wager. He moved through the palace, a silent shadow, watching the emperor's twin being meticulously crafted, seeing the physical transformation, the gradual erasure of one man's identity. He felt the cold dread of knowing too much, of carrying a truth that could bring him to a swift, brutal end. The palace, once a symbol of opulence, now felt like a vast, cold tomb, its grand halls echoing with the chilling reality of lies and impending doom. The emperor's twin was not a solution. He was a terrifying question, a living paradox at the heart of an empire on the brink of collapse, pushing Silas inexorably towards a nightmare in the oracle's garden. Story 8: Nightmares in the Oracle's Garden. Silas, once a street rat, now a silent shadow in Senator Lucius Valerius's opulent villa, carried a terrifying burden. He had exposed Empress Livia's monstrous plot to destabilize Rome through engineered famine and revealed the horrifying secret of the reactivated Ninth Legion. His recent perilous foray into the deception of the emperor's twin, a living replica being meticulously crafted to subvert imperial authority, had pushed him to the brink. The palace, once a symbol of opulence, now felt like a vast, cold tomb, its grand halls echoing with the chilling reality of lies and impending doom. Livia's ambition knew no bounds, her ruthless grasp extending to every corner of the empire. The shadows within the keep's stone walls deepened with each passing day, casting a pall over Silas's very soul. And now, the horror began to manifest not just in the waking world, but in the terrifying realm of his dreams, leading him to nightmares in the oracle's garden. The days following Silas's discovery of the emperor's twin were fraught with an unbearable psychological tension. He continued his duties as cubicularius, moving silently through Lucius's villa, but his every sense was acutely tuned to the shifting currents of fear and ambition in Rome. The famine continued its relentless grip, its cries echoing from every street corner. Whispers of widespread discontent mingled with the terrifying rumors of the plague, which still claimed lives in both hovels and palaces. Senator Lucius, a man of profound political cunning, understood that direct confrontation with Livia was suicidal. He needed a strategy, a means to expose her without risking immediate annihilation, a subtle dagger to sever the serpent's coil. He needed a lever that could move an empire. Silas, now an indispensable part of Lucius's clandestine efforts, continued his silent surveillance, his skills for invisibility and acute observation honed by years of living in the shadows. He gathered intelligence, tracked couriers, and pieced together fragments of information that painted an increasingly grim picture of Livia's grand design. He understood the stakes intimately. This was no longer just about survival. It was about the very soul of Rome. The knowledge of the emperor's twin, a grotesque perversion of imperial power, weighed heavily on him, filling his nights with restless, feverish dreams. These dreams were not the typical nightmares of a hungry orphan. They were vivid, unsettling, and strangely symbolic. He dreamt of ancient gardens, overgrown and shrouded in mist, where gnarled trees seemed to whisper forgotten words. He saw figures cloaked in dark robes, their faces hidden, performing strange arcane rituals around a flickering flame. He heard faint, unsettling chanting in a language he couldn't understand, yet it resonated deep within his bones, filling him with a profound sense of dread. And always, a sense of something ancient stirring, something forbidden, something that presaged doom. He saw flashes of grotesque masks, of serpents coiling, of blood-staining sacred stone. At first, Silas dismissed them as the byproduct of exhaustion and the overwhelming stress of his secret life. But the dreams grew more vivid, more insistent, repeating themselves with terrifying regularity. The details became clearer. The specific layout of the garden, the intricate patterns on the cloaks, the strange, almost familiar, symbols etched into the stone altar in his dreams. He began to recognize elements he had glimpsed in the stolen letters from the Lost Legion, and even in the hidden chamber beneath the baths of Caracalla. A chilling connection began to form in his mind. These weren't just nightmares. They were fragments of a deeper, more ancient truth trying to surface. Driven by a desperate need for understanding, Silas, with Lucius's permission, began to discreetly research ancient texts and forgotten lore in the senator's vast private library. He delved into dusty scrolls, seeking answers, seeking patterns, seeking anything that might explain his terrifying nocturnal visions. He focused on texts pertaining to Eastern mystics, forgotten deities, and forbidden cults, areas that usually held little interest for practical Romans. It was a perilous undertaking. Even possessing such texts could be viewed with suspicion. He stumbled upon references to an ancient oracle, long since suppressed by the official Roman pantheon. A deity, often associated with serpentine imagery and the unseen forces of the earth, whose prophecies were said to be granted in a secluded, overgrown garden, far from the bustling city, yet connected to its hidden currents. The descriptions matched his dreams with chilling accuracy. The gnarled trees, the mist, the specific symbols etched into forgotten altars. This was the oracle's garden, a place shrouded in myth and taboo, long thought to be abandoned. And then, he found a terrifying connection. The texts warned of a time when the oracle's garden would stir again, when its forgotten deities would be invoked and its ancient prophecies reawakened. These prophecies, the scrolls hinted, spoke of the subversion of identity, of a twin taking the throne, of a city consumed by a serpent's hunger, echoing the famine and Livia's symbolic serpent. The dreams were not random. They were prophetic visions, drawing him into a cosmic layer of Livia's monstrous ambition. This was not merely political machination. It was a dark ritual, tapping into ancient, forbidden powers, a profound corruption that stretched beyond the physical realm. Silas presented his findings to Senator Lucius. The senator listened intently, his cold intellect absorbing every detail. He was a man of reason, a product of Roman pragmatism, usually dismissive of superstition. But the uncanny accuracy of Silas's dreams, combined with the detailed consistency of the ancient texts and Livia's known ruthlessness, made him pause. "Prophecy," Lucius murmured, a strange note in his voice. Or simply, a very old playbook being reenacted. He understood that Livia was not just a political schemer. She was a dangerous force, willing to exploit any belief, any fear, any ancient power, to achieve her aims. Further discreet investigation confirmed Silas's chilling deductions. Certain high-ranking officials, known for their esoteric interests and their subtle allegiance to Livia, had been making secret journeys outside the city. Their destinations, when discreetly tracked, led to the long-abandoned site of the Oracle's Garden. At night, under the cover of impenetrable darkness, Eastern mystics and veiled figures, their faces hidden, began to gather there. Their presence, so far from their homelands, their rituals conducted in secret, confirmed the terrifying truth. Livia was not just exploiting an ancient legend, she was actively reviving a forbidden cult, twisting its rituals for her own nefarious purposes. The chilling implication was clear. Livia was using these ancient, dark rituals to lend a veneer of divine legitimacy to her actions. The weeping statue in the Pantheon, the orchestrated famine, the lost legion. All were part of a grand design, but this was a darker, more spiritual layer. By invoking forbidden deities, by manipulating ancient prophecies, she sought to control not just the physical realm, but the very hearts and minds of the populace, making them believe her ascent was divinely ordained. The nightmares were not just a burden. They were a warning, a desperate cry from the ancient spirits themselves, revealing Livia's profound corruption. Silas, now a fully integrated and indispensable part of Lucius's intelligence network, felt the weight of his discoveries press down on him. He was no longer just a servant. He was a scholar of shadows, a keeper of dangerous truths. He had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened not just the emperor, but the very soul of Rome. The empire was being consumed by an insidious darkness, a blend of political ambition and dark ritual, orchestrated by Empress Livia. The fear that had driven Silas since childhood, the fear of the brutality of the streets, had evolved into a far more profound and existential terror. He was battling not just men, but unseen forces, ancient beliefs twisted for monstrous purposes. The silence in the senator's study, broken only by the rustle of ancient scrolls, was thick with the weight of unspeakable secrets. He often found himself staring at the flickering oil lamps, wondering if the darkness they illuminated was truly less terrifying than the truths they concealed. The nightmares in the Oracle's Garden were a constant presence, a chilling reminder of the dark, ancient forces Livia was so casually wielding. He knew he was living on borrowed time. Livia's network was vast, her reach absolute. Every shadow held a potential spy, every whisper a possible betrayal. His very existence, his knowledge, made him a target. He had witnessed the meticulous crafting of the Emperor's twin, the systematic erasure of one man's identity to serve Livia's grand deception. Now, he understood the full, horrifying scope of her ambition. This was an empress forging an empire not just through political cunning and military might, but through the dark alchemy of ancient rituals and carefully orchestrated nightmares. The question of how to expose Livia without triggering widespread panic or signing his own death warrant became paramount. Lucius, ever pragmatic, understood that traditional methods would fail. They needed proof, undeniable, unassailable proof, and a moment to strike that would shatter Livia's carefully constructed facade. The truth, if revealed prematurely, would only lead to more chaos, more death, and a swift end to their own lives. Silas knew that his journey into the heart of this conspiracy had only just begun. The Oracle's Garden, with its ancient secrets and its terrifying visions, was merely another layer in Livia's labyrinthine scheme. He was no longer just observing. He was actively involved, a silent pawn in a game far grander and more dangerous than any he had ever imagined. His only hope lay in his ability to decipher the remaining secrets, to find the hidden lever that could unravel the serpent's coil, even if it meant venturing deeper into the Roman underworld, towards the horrifying discovery of the arena below the arena. Story 9: The Arena Below the Arena. Silas, once a street rat, now a scholar of shadows in Senator Lucius Valerius's opulent villa, carried a terrifying burden. He had exposed Empress Livia's monstrous plot to destabilize Rome through engineered famine and revealed the horrifying secret of the reactivated Ninth Legion. His perilous foray into the deception of the Emperor's twin had been a chilling testament to Livia's ruthless ambition. Now, his sleep was haunted by nightmares in the Oracle's garden, vivid visions of ancient rituals and forbidden deities, hinting at a darker, more spiritual layer to Livia's monstrous plan. The realization that Livia was not just a political schemer, but a manipulator of ancient, dark powers, had profoundly deepened the shadows within the keep's stone walls, extending their chilling reach across the entire empire. And it was this intricate web of ancient intrigue and terrifying prophecy that would now lead Silas to the most unthinkable of places, the arena below the arena. The days following Silas's unsettling dreams were fraught with a new, existential tension. He continued his duties as cubicularius, meticulously performing tasks, yet his every sense was acutely tuned to the shifting currents of fear and ambition in Rome. The famine continued its relentless grip, its cries echoing from every street corner, and the plague, though often overshadowed by the political turmoil, still claimed lives in both hovels and palaces. Senator Lucius, a man of profound political cunning, understood that direct confrontation with Livia was suicidal. He needed a strategy, a means to expose her without risking immediate annihilation, a subtle dagger to sever the serpent's coil. He needed a lever that could move an empire, a truth so undeniable it would shatter Livia's carefully constructed facade. Silas, now an indispensable part of Lucius's clandestine efforts, continued his silent surveillance, his skills for invisibility and acute observation honed by years of living in the shadows. He gathered intelligence, tracked couriers, and pieced together fragments of information that painted an increasingly grim picture of Livia's grand design. He understood the stakes intimately. This was no longer just about survival. It was about the very soul of Rome. The knowledge of the Emperor's twin, a grotesque perversion of imperial power, weighed heavily on him, filling his waking hours with dread and his nights with prophetic torment. The nightmares in the Oracle's garden were not random. They were a horrifying map, subtly guiding him towards Livia's deepest secrets, revealing her use of ancient forbidden magic. It was in the midst of this pervasive dread that news began to filter through Rome about the Colosseum. That colossal amphitheater, a symbol of Roman might and communal entertainment, had begun to show its age. Minor structural cracks, exacerbated by recent tremors and years of neglect, had necessitated repair work on its extensive underground network. The hypogeum, the vast labyrinth beneath the arena floor, was being reshored, its ancient mechanisms for raising beasts and gladiators being reinforced. This was public knowledge, a routine city project. But for Silas, who knew of Livia's hidden operations beneath the baths of Caracalla, routine was never truly routine. He sensed an underlying current, a deliberate purpose behind these repairs, perhaps a new clandestine operation. His instincts, honed by years of survival and his recent discoveries, proved chillingly accurate. He began to subtly observe the work crews assigned to the Colosseum repairs. They were mostly common slaves and laborers, but among them, Silas again noticed the disciplined, almost military bearing of certain figures, moving with quiet efficiency in the shadows. These were not the usual city workers. They were legionaries, or at least men who had been, now working for an unseen master. They were the same type of figures he had seen beneath the baths of Caracalla, loyal to Livia, moving with calculated precision. Silas, using his unparalleled stealth, managed to slip into the Colosseum's underground network. The hypogeum was a vast, echoing labyrinth, filled with the ghosts of gladiators and roaring beasts, its air thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient blood. He moved through its dark corridors, a silent shadow, following the faint sounds of muffled work, deeper and deeper into the earth. He bypassed guarded sections, used forgotten service passages, and finally discovered it. Hidden beneath the very floor of the Colosseum's main arena, accessed through a cleverly disguised, newly reinforced section, lay another level. A subterranean chamber, far older than the Colosseum itself, designed differently, built with a more ancient, brutal purpose. This was the arena below the arena. This chamber was not part of the standard hypogeum. It was isolated, concealed, lacking any obvious stairs or easy exits. It was a place designed for permanence, for secrecy. The air here was heavy, stagnant, carrying a faint, disturbing scent, not just dust and decay, but something else, something metallic and acrid, like old, dried blood, mingled with a faint, sweet smell of fear. As Silas explored, using his small, hidden oil lamp, the horrors of the chamber revealed themselves. It was filled with what looked like ancient sacrificial altars, crudely fashioned from rough stone, their surfaces stained with unidentifiable dark patterns. Scattered around were crude instruments, not the polished tridents of gladiators, but heavy, blunted hammers, sharpened bone fragments, and intricately carved obsidian knives. And everywhere, fragments of bone. Not the clean, scattered bones of animals from arena games, but human bones. Mutilated, bearing signs of immense, prolonged suffering. Most chillingly, he found them. Columns of stone, crudely drilled with rows of holes, standing upright like monstrous ancient pillars. And attached to one, a single perfectly preserved silver mask, its expression frozen in a silent scream. The mask was unlike any Roman design, its artistry crude, yet deeply disturbing, covered in the same strange interlocking symbols he had seen in the journal from Dravold, the ancient texts, and even the weeping statue device. This was not a place for public spectacles. This was a place for ancient, barbaric rituals, far older and more terrifying than any gladiatorial combat. The realization hit Silas with the force of a physical blow. This chamber, this arena below the arena, was a direct link to the nightmares in the Oracle's garden. The symbols, the rituals, the human bones. It all pointed to a forbidden, dark cult, practicing human sacrifice, invoking ancient, malevolent powers. And Livia, he now understood, was at its heart. She wasn't just a political schemer. She was a priestess of darkness, a manipulator of forbidden magic, using ancient evil to consolidate her power. The human bones, the drilled stone columns, the chilling silver mask. These were the instruments and remnants of a terrifying cult. He remembered the letters to the Lost Legion, the strange oaths and promises. He remembered the Emperor's twin, a perversion of identity. He remembered the famine, the control over the grain. And now, this. Livia was using every tool imaginable: political intrigue, economic manipulation, military might, and dark, ancient rituals. This hidden chamber, this arena below the arena, was likely where she performed her most heinous rites, offering human sacrifices to the forbidden deities to secure her dominance, to imbue her actions with a terrifying, unholy power. The sounds he heard, the rhythmic scraping, were not from repairs. They were from digging. Digging for more victims. Digging for ancient artifacts. Or perhaps, digging for something else entirely, something that lay even deeper. Silas meticulously documented everything, sketching the symbols, noting the locations of the bone fragments, memorizing the layout of the ritual space. He had to be careful. These were not just historical relics, but active instruments of power. He felt the weight of immense danger, the chilling awareness that he was trespassing on truly forbidden ground. If Livia's followers discovered him, he would not simply be killed. He would be offered to the very powers she invoked, his body becoming another nameless bone in this horrifying arena. He returned to Senator Lucius, his face grim, his report delivered in a hushed, urgent tone. Lucius, usually unflappable, listened with a rare, profound stillness. His cold intellect, which had dismissed Silas's dreams as mere superstition, now recognized the chilling consistency of the symbols, the ritualistic nature of the bones, the sheer audacity of Livia's reach. "Human sacrifice," Lucius murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "To secure power. It is monstrous. It defies all Roman law." He looked at Silas, his eyes cold and sharp. "You have found her true face, Silas. This is her ultimate weapon. She believes herself beyond mortal law, beyond mortal challenge." The discovery of the arena below the arena changed everything. It transformed Livia from a cunning political adversary into a terrifying, unholy force. The stakes of their struggle were no longer just about who sat on the throne. They were about the very soul of Rome. Silas, the former street orphan, was now tasked with combating not just a human conspiracy, but a dark, ancient evil that threatened to consume the empire from within. He knew his life was in immense danger. Livia's network was vast, her reach absolute. Every shadow held a potential spy, every whisper a possible betrayal. His very existence, his knowledge, made him a target. He had witnessed the meticulous crafting of the Emperor's twin, the systematic erasure of one man's identity to serve Livia's grand deception. Now, he understood the full, horrifying scope of her ambition. This was an empress forging an empire not just through political cunning and military might, but through the dark alchemy of ancient rituals and carefully orchestrated nightmares. The scars of time were not just etched on human bodies, they were burned into the very soul of Rome, a heavy toll paid for unchecked ambition. The ultimate confrontation was drawing near. Silas, a small figure against the vastness of the Roman Empire, carried the weight of this terrible truth. The arena below the arena, with its horrifying secrets, was not just a place of ancient rituals. It was a chilling prophecy, a testament to Livia's terrifying ambition, a dark reflection of Rome's corrupted soul. His discovery would inevitably lead him to a new, even more perilous path, one that plunged him into the heart of the Senate itself, where the ultimate silence would fall. Story 10: Silence in the Senate. Silas, once a street rat, now a ghost in Senator Lucius Valerius's opulent villa, carried a terrifying burden. He had exposed Empress Livia's monstrous plot to destabilize Rome through engineered famine and revealed the horrifying secret of the reactivated Ninth Legion. His perilous foray into the deception of the Emperor's twin and his chilling discoveries beneath the baths of Caracalla had confirmed Livia's unholy ambition. The nightmares in the Oracle's garden had revealed a darker, more spiritual layer to her monstrous plan, connecting her to forbidden cults and ancient, malevolent powers. And his latest, most horrifying find, the arena below the arena, a subterranean chamber of human sacrifice and dark rituals, had cemented the chilling truth. Livia was preparing to seize absolute power through sheer force and dark magic, and the empire itself teetered on the brink of civil war. Senator Lucius, his cold intellect absorbing every damning detail, knew the immense stakes. The shadows within the keep's stone walls now stretched across the entire empire, threatening to consume it in darkness. Now all roads led to the very heart of Roman power, the Senate, where a chilling silence was about to fall, signifying the collapse of an empire. The days following Silas's discovery beneath the Colosseum were fraught with an unbearable tension. Rome was a powder keg. The famine continued its relentless grip, its cries echoing from every street corner, every barren market stall. Whispers of widespread discontent mingled with the terrifying rumors of the plague, which still claimed lives in both hovels and palaces. Senator Lucius, a man of profound political cunning, understood that direct confrontation with Livia was suicidal. Her power was immense, her reach absolute, her ruthlessness chillingly effective. He needed a strategy, a means to expose her without risking immediate annihilation, a subtle dagger to sever the serpent's coil. He needed a lever that could move an empire, a truth so undeniable it would shatter Livia's carefully constructed facade. Silas, now an indispensable part of Lucius's clandestine efforts, continued his silent surveillance, his skills for invisibility and acute observation honed by years of living in the shadows. He gathered intelligence, tracked couriers, and pieced together fragments of information that painted an increasingly grim picture of Livia's grand design. He understood the stakes intimately. This was no longer just about survival. It was about the very soul of Rome. The knowledge of the emperor's twin, a grotesque perversion of imperial power, weighed heavily on him, filling his waking hours with dread and his nights with prophetic torment. The nightmares in the oracle's garden were not random. They were a horrifying map, subtly guiding him towards Livia's deepest secrets, revealing her use of ancient forbidden magic. Lucius, with Silas at his side, had systematically analyzed all the information. The engineered famine, the reactivated Ninth Legion, the Emperor's double, the dark rituals beneath the baths of Caracalla, and finally, the horrifying discovery of the arena below the arena. The sheer scale and depravity of Livia's ambition were breathtaking. She was not merely seeking to influence. She was seeking to usurp not just the throne, but the very essence of Rome, replacing its traditional gods with darker, more ancient powers, and its legitimate rule with her own absolute, tyrannical will. The moment for action was approaching, driven by the Emperor Tiberius's rapidly failing health. The real Tiberius, sick and increasingly paranoid, was confined to his private chambers, his every public appearance now performed by his meticulously crafted twin, controlled by Livia. This deception could not last indefinitely. Livia was preparing for the final phase of her plan, the public announcement of the emperor's death and the subsequent installation of a pliable successor, entirely under her thumb, backed by her hidden legion. Lucius understood that a direct accusation would fail. Livia had too many allies, too many spies, too much power. He needed to strike at her legitimacy, at the very core of her deception, but in a way that left no doubt, yet offered no direct target for her assassins. He needed to use the truth, but veiled. His plan was audacious, relying on the Roman Senate, that ancient body steeped in tradition and ritual. The Senate, though often manipulated, still held immense symbolic power. It was the very heart of Roman law, the ultimate arbiter of succession. Lucius decided that the truth of Livia's deception, particularly the existence of the emperor's twin, had to be revealed within the Senate, at a moment that would expose her without giving her time to retaliate. The final Senate meeting before the emperor's expected demise was called. It was a somber affair, held in the Curia Julia, the very symbol of Roman power. Senators, pale and gaunt from the famine, their faces etched with fear of the plague, gathered, their whispers hushed, their expressions grim. Livia was present, radiant and composed, seemingly the grieving wife, ready to guide the empire through its upcoming transition. Roland, the emperor's illegitimate son, now fully embraced by Livia's faction, stood nearby, a subtle threat to any who might question the impending succession. Silas, disguised as a scribe, moved silently among the senators, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was Lucius's shadow, carrying the small, innocuous leather pouch that held the damning truth. He had memorized every detail, every instruction. This was his moment, the culmination of years of silent observation, of navigating the treacherous shadows within the keep's stone walls. The meeting began with grim formalities. Speeches were made, prayers offered for the emperor's health. Livia's allies spoke eloquently of her devotion, her wisdom, her vital role in guiding the ailing Tiberius. They subtly hinted at the necessity of a swift and seamless transition, controlled by those most capable of ensuring Rome's stability. The air was thick with veiled threats and unspoken promises. Then, Senator Lucius rose. His voice, usually cold and precise, now held a strange, resonant quality. He spoke not of politics, but of the very essence of Rome, of its ancient traditions, of the sacred trust between the people and their emperor. He spoke of omens, of signs from the gods, of the purity of the imperial line. Livia watched him, a faint, almost imperceptible frown on her serene face. She knew Lucius was a formidable opponent, but she believed she had outmaneuvered him. Lucius continued, his voice slow and deliberate, drawing out the suspense. He spoke of the divine manifestation in the Pantheon, the statue that wept blood. He spoke of the famine, the suffering of the people. He spoke of the need for absolute truth, for the empire to be free of all deception. And then, he lowered his voice, his words resonating through the silent hall, aimed directly at Livia. "There are shadows, esteemed senators," he declared. "Shadows that cling to the very image of our emperor. Shadows that seek to corrupt truth itself." Livia's eyes narrowed, but her composure remained unbroken. She knew he was circling, but she believed her deception was absolute. Then, Lucius made his move. He didn't produce the evidence of the hidden legion, or the arena below the arena. He didn't mention Cassius Nero. Such accusations, without direct, corroborating witnesses, could be dismissed as madness. Instead, he spoke of a prophecy, a rarely invoked ancient Roman custom, the trial of the emperor's reflection. A ceremony, he explained, where in times of profound crisis or doubt, the true essence of the emperor could be called forth to cast away all shadows, all illusions. He proposed that, given the emperor's ailing health and the public's widespread concern, this sacred ritual be performed. It required the emperor's true reflection to appear before the Senate in a moment of absolute silence, confirming his divine legitimacy. Livia's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of something akin to panic. The trial of the emperor's reflection was an ancient, almost forgotten ritual, shrouded in superstition and rarely performed. It demanded not just the emperor's presence, but his true essence, free of all artifice. It was a test of the soul, a moment of profound, sacred transparency. It was precisely what her emperor's twin could not provide. His reflection, though physically identical, would carry no true imperial authority, no divine spark, no authentic presence. The Senate, gripped by the drama, by the weight of ancient custom, began to murmur. They knew of the emperor's growing seclusion, of his reliance on Livia. The proposal was audacious, but it resonated with their profound need for certainty, for a return to stability. A vote was called. Livia, trapped by her public image as a devout consort, could not openly refuse without casting suspicion on herself and the emperor's health. Her subtle signals to her allies were ignored, drowned out by the Senate's collective yearning for truth. The motion passed. The ceremony was to be held within the hour, in a secluded ancient hall of the Senate building. Silas watched Livia. Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, now held a flicker of desperation. Her network of spies, her hidden legion, her assassin, none of it could help her here. This was a battle of legitimacy, a test of divine right, a realm where her meticulous deceptions were utterly vulnerable. The designated hall was prepared, lit only by flickering oil lamps. Senators gathered, their faces grim and expectant. Livia stood beside the emperor's litter, her expression composed, but a subtle tremor in her hand betrayed her inner turmoil. The litter was opened, and the emperor, or rather, his twin, Valerius Aulus, emerged. He was dressed in imperial robes, his face a perfect replica of Tiberius, meticulously crafted by Livia's hand. He sat on the imperial throne, looking regal, yet to Silas, who knew the truth, he seemed like a hollow shell. The ritual began. The high priest chanted ancient words, invoking the gods. Then, he announced the moment for the emperor's reflection. A polished bronze mirror, large and ancient, was brought forth. The hall fell utterly silent, a profound, almost spiritual hush. Every eye was fixed on the mirror, waiting for the true emperor's reflection to confirm his divine right. As the mirror was held before Valerius Aulus, A strange, eerie quiet descended upon the Senate. For 47 seconds, a span of time that stretched into an eternity, there was no sound, no breath, no rustle of robes, no whisper, nothing. Only the flickering of the oil lamps and the profound, suffocating silence. The reflection in the mirror was perfect, physically identical to Tiberius. But there was something missing. A profound emptiness. A lack of soul. A subtle wrongness that resonated in the unnerving quiet. The silence grew heavier. It pressed down on the senators, on Livia, on Valerius Aulus himself. It was a silence that screamed of deception, of a stolen identity, of a truth that could not be hidden. It was the moment justice beyond law finally manifested. And then, just as the silence became unbearable, Valerius Aulus, the emperor's twin, who had been trained for months to mimic Tiberius perfectly, suddenly stiffened. A faint tremor passed through his body. His eyes, fixed on his own reflection, widened with a dawning horror. For a fleeting instant, the mask broke. His meticulously crafted composure shattered. A single, profound gasp escaped his lips, not Tiberius's, but his own, Valerius Aulus's, a sound of utter despair. He saw his own captured soul, a ghost of a man, reflected in the bronze. He saw the ultimate price of his deception. The gasp, though soft, broke the spell. The high priest, his face pale, slowly lowered the mirror. The silence in the Senate remained, but it was now a silence filled with shattered illusions, with the horrifying truth of betrayal. Livia's face, for the first time, crumpled. Her serene mask shattered, revealing the raw, venomous fury beneath. She knew. She had been exposed. The silence that fell, profound and absolute, was not just the end of a Senate meeting. It was the chilling sound of an empire crumbling. And Silas, the silent witness, had finally found the lever that could unravel the serpent's coil, even as the shadow of a truly immortal scar began to etch itself onto the very soul of Rome.